we're good to go.
Okay. Hey everyone, welcome to the Common Thread, the official podcast of the Howard Thurman Center for Common Ground. I'm Amanda Dowd.
I'm Kareem Ahmed.
And I'm Greg Wilson.
And we have a special show for today. We're going to be talking about the US-Iranian conflict that has been going on for decades now, and recently with talk of nuclear weapons has been getting even more attention. So joining us today are Jack Goldberg of Boston University Students for Israel and Kareem Chehayeb, sorry, of the Youth Anti-War Coalition. We also have Jay Jones, the External Vice President of Umoja, the Black Student Union, joining us just to add another perspective. So thanks for joining us, guys.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So the way we're going to work today is we're going to have both Jack and Kareem. We're going to give them about 5 minutes each to summarize their positions on this issue and make their case, so to speak. Then we'll have a little debate going, and hopefully there will be time for a debriefing of sorts at the end. But we'll see how we're doing that time. So Jack, is it all right if we start with you?
Absolutely.
All right. So just take it from wherever you want.
All right. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you guys very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And just one quick correction to the introduction is that I am not actually officially on board for Boston University Students for Israel anymore.
Okay.
And the views I'm going to say today also just represent myself, but also a common feeling around the pro-Israel and community. So how I would begin a debrief on this or a brief on this would just be to say ask the question of why are there sanctions on Iran? The issue of why are there sanctions? And it's pretty clear that because no one wants Iran to have a nuclear weapon is the reason why there are sanctions on Iran. Now,
can you give a quick description of sanctions?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Sanctions are where other governments outside of a certain government, such as Iran, so the U.S. and the rest of the world, EU, UN, and governmental organizations outside of Iran say, we are going to implement trade tariffs, we're going to not do business with you, and we are intentionally going to make your currency spike in order to deter you from doing something that none of us think that you should be doing. And so the U.S., the EU, and the UN have all passed these sanctions in order to, as they've said, make sure Iran does not get a nuclear weapon. Now, is that a good explanation of sanctions?
Yes.
Okay,
great.
perfect. So just to go on that, so the real question boils down to why doesn't the world want Iran to get a nuclear weapon? The reasons, again, come down to a couple of simple things. One is the rhetoric that Iran has used when talking to the world about Israel, about the United States. Another is the fact that Iran may spark a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. And these are all broad points which I will quickly expand on. Iran being the #1 state sponsor of terror recognized by the United States of America. Iran having strategically placed allies to leverage and hurt the United States and the United States as allies. Iran not attempting a peaceful nuclear program. And the fact that the world is united against Iran having nuclear weapons. So just to expand quickly, and please let me know if I go over time.
You're fine.
Citations for all these are available. Iranian government has said, quote, the Iranian warriors are ready and willing to wipe Israel off the map, said the Deputy Defense Minister Ahmed Vahidi. Israel must be, quote, eliminated. Israel must be wiped off the pages of history is a quote that is accepted by everyone. And the fact that they say the Zionist, not even Israel, the Zionist regime must be wiped off the pages of history implies that the fact that there is a Jewish state is an issue for the country of, or at least the regime of Iran. And to clear this up before anything, I want to say that I think sanctions are terrible, obviously. I think sanctions are terrible things. And the people of Iran don't deserve to suffer for the actions of the Iranian government. However, the way that sanctions are worked is that sometimes people suffer for the actions of the government. Now, the Iranian regime has also said things about the United States. In addition to denying the Holocaust, for Ahmadinejad, the president of Iran has denied the Holocaust. He said that Israel, quote, is a cancerous tumor on this region that should be cut out. That was also echoed by the Ayatollah, also known as the supreme leader of Iran. And so Ahmadinejad recently, well, not that recently, but he did say, today is the time for the fall of the satanic power of the United States has come, and the countdown to the annihilation of the imperium of power and wealth has started. Along with, as long as America exists, we will not rest. We will raise public hate against this despotic power and create an environment of destruction for America. That was said by Mahmoud Reza Naqvi, the head of Iran's paramilitary force. So when you have rhetoric like that, it is frightening to give that person or allow that person to develop nuclear weapons. It's frightening to give an unstable regime nuclear weapons. And in addition, one of the main things that academics across the world are talking about is the nuclear arms race in the Middle East. Now, every other day, not literally, but figuratively, there are regimes falling in the Middle East. Look at Syria. Look at everywhere. Look at the revolts that happen against the United States embassies. Look at all the different uprisings and the Arab Spring that happen in the Middle East. It's important to recognize that if Iran develops a nuclear weapon, then it could fall into the wrong hands very easily, even if Iran isn't going to use it. And to be clear, personally, I do not think Iran would put a nuclear bomb on Israel. I don't think so, but I think they would use it as a deterrent to help destroy the state of Israel, and as a deterrent to the United States to help destroy the state of Israel. Now, just briefing through my next couple of points, a nuclear arms race in the Middle East is a frightening thing. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Turkey have all expressed interest in a nuclear bomb if Iran gets one. Saudi Arabia is prime for a revolution. Jordan is prime for a revolution. These are places that no one wants to have a nuclear bomb for it to fall into the wrong hands. In addition, Iran is the #1 state sponsor of terror. That's backed up by facts, not just facts from news sources, but the U.S. State Department has proclaimed Iran the #1 state sponsor of terror. They recently armed Hezbollah with a drone to attack Israel as well from Lebanon. In addition, just quickly, Iran does have strategic allies that could leverage the U.S., including Venezuela. If Iran puts a nuclear bomb in Venezuela, the U.S. is not powerless, but has its arms tied, if you will, in regards to the rest of the world, and especially the Middle East. Iran is not attempting Iran is attempting nuclear weapons because they've hidden things from the IAEA, and we can get into that in a bit. And in addition, the United States Senate has voted on this 100-0, which doesn't happen. The UN and the EU, so pretty much the rest of the world, has declared these sanctions, and that's the main reason why I think these sanctions are necessary, so Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jack. Kareem, would you like to start now?
Yeah, sure. All right. So,
if you don't mind leaning a little bit closer to us.
yeah, I can do that. So, great. Okay. So, first of all, what I'm going to say pretty much is the common perspective in the anti-war coalition, though there will always be a few differences here and there. We generally take a principled stance on this issue. So while we're opposed to sanctions, we're also opposed to state repression, without a doubt. And this is what most people opposed sanctions support. It's not that if you're against sanctions, you support the regime of Iran. That is one huge thing that we're trying to clear out. The sanctions have been causing a massive humanitarian crisis in Iran, and Iran is a country that has 75 million people, a little bit more than that. And I think it's unfair to say that that people have to will have to suffer under the consequences of the government's actions. Sanctions have clearly not worked in the past. We look at Iraq and the sanctions that were placed on Iraq, where about 500,000 children under the age of 5 died as a result of that, which Clinton imposed. And we sought to invade Iraq. Saddam was okay. There was still the issue of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and we sought to invade, and Iraq is not in any better condition than it was. It's still unstable and still dangerous there, and there's a crisis there. Also, clearly the sanctions in Iran are not making the situation any better. It does not encourage any democratic movements in Iran. It does not encourage any sort of progression in Iranian society, because I think once people are dealing with issues like, finding medicine for their children, there's a huge issue of cancer medicines not being able to reach Iran because of the sanctions, or issues where people can't afford food because of the skyrocketing prices and inflation going up by 196%, and so on and so forth. This will make them ignore any aspirations of continuing, a revolution for a democratic government or a more democratic society or LGBTQ rights in Iran or whatever. They'll be focusing on whether they can live or die, whether they can provide for a family or not. And this is completely unfair because Iran recently had the Green Movement, which was a massive movement, and they had these massive democratic aspirations, and it's only slowing them down. So I think it's pretty much unfair when a lot of people support the sanctions, claimed that this is a good move in order for Iran's regime to weaken, because clearly, in relatively authoritarian regimes, when there are sanctions that hit, they're not going to help their people out. They're going to make sure they can get as much as they possibly can. Let's see. And the fact of the matter is, there are potential opportunities for diplomatic solutions. For example, there's the Helsinki Conference 2012, which looks into a nuclear weapons-free Middle East. The Arab countries have confirmed that they're interested in being part of this. Iran has also, and Israel said Israel's not interested. Israel is not interested in going in, and this is a concern. This is a perfect diplomatic solution, and Israel should be involved. This is for the benefit of the entire region, and this could lead to further peace process in the region to prevent war in the future, any safety issues. Also, another concern is that Israel hasn't signed the non-proliferation treaty. That's another massive concern. And regarding the whole concept of state sponsor of terrorism, there's been issues like that going on in Iran, and we can see that with Israel using U.S. dollars and toting U.S. passports, recruiting Jundallah operations. And Jundallah is an extremist group, and they've assassinated Iranian scientists and have conducted suicide bombings. So I think there's an issue on both ends, and sanctions are not the solution. They are diplomatic opportunities, and there's so much potential in having a much better solution than sanctions. Clearly.
Okay, thank you so much, Kareem. So if you guys just want to start debating, feel free to address each other directly. I'd be happy to add a question, but you probably have more questions for each other.
I've got a couple.
All right, go ahead.
If you don't mind, thank you very much, Kareem.
Sure.
Just a couple of notes I took on what you said. I thought some of your points were really great. But a couple of things include that I agree that, regular citizens should not have sanctions applied to them. However, first of all, sanctions are I'm not going to say normal diplomatic use, but they're still used in North Korea. But I don't understand why you guys aren't, as just the anti-war coalition, dealing with that, the North Korean sanctions, which cripple the North Korean economy and cripple the North Korean people. Not just that, but also we still have sanctions on Cuba from the 60s. These are sanctions that could potentially hurt a lot of individuals, human beings. And just to touch on something very, very specific about the medicine. So after you guys spoke at the Student Senate, I went online, and especially today, actually, about 18 hours ago, the Los Angeles Times published a piece, and it's right here if you want to take a look, about the U.S. lifting most of the red tape on getting medicine to Iranian civilians. Now, originally, medicine is still okay to get to Iranian civilians, no problem, no one should die because of these sanctions, but there was some red tape, and the U.S. recognized that, and they lifted that red tape so that Iranian civilians wouldn't have to suffer. Now, when I look at this, and I look at what you guys are saying, and I agree the Iranian citizens shouldn't suffer, but what I do say is, why don't we call on the Iranian government? Why don't we call on some sort of international way of saying, stop abusing your people like this, stop pursuing a nuclear weapon, and step back, come to the peace table, and as soon as you come to the peace table and you don't go back to pursuing a nuclear weapon, those sanctions will be lifted. And just to go off of the Helsinki thing as well that you spoke about, the nuclear-free Middle East, yes, Israel has not signed the NPT. Israel has not signed it, absolutely. But, on the other hand, Israel has been attacked by all of its neighbors on multiple occasions, 48, 67, 74, 2006. These are issues that I'm not saying Israel deserves a bomb, I'm not saying Israel has a bomb. What I am saying, though, is that Israel has never called for the destruction of another country. Israel has never said, we're going to take our bomb and give it to terrorists, we're going to use it to destroy another regime. No matter what regime, whether it's Islamic, Western, it doesn't matter. Israel has never called for the destruction of another country. And that is important because when you're talking about a country that potentially has a bomb, that has I'm going to say the word, I'm not going to say crazy, but I will say intense rhetoric, versus a country that may have a bomb, that's trying to get a bomb and has intense rhetoric, you come up with an issue where one is clearly a more aggressive country that has proven to use its resources to help fund problems. Now, as for Israeli funding of terrorism, I have heard about the operations to assassinate Iranian scientists working directly on a nuclear bomb. I have heard about that. I cannot confirm or deny that because I don't know the facts. Honestly, I'm not in the Israeli government.
It's on foreign policy.
Okay. I've heard that, but I've never heard of a suicide bomb happening in Iran from Israelis prompting for
which
one.
is the organization which Israel sponsored
Israel officially sponsored Jandallah.
through the CIA using U.S. passports, and it's on foreign policy. And I can link you to the article.
I would love it to see a link to that, because I do not believe that Israel would sponsor suicide bombers. Honestly, I believe that Israel would do targeted strikes to ensure that Iran cannot get a nuclear weapon, but I do not believe they would use
I'll be
suicide
more than happy
bombers.
to do the link
Please
after-
do.
at 3:45.
In addition to what you said about the Iranian Green Revolution, and what you're saying that this would stop the Iranians from revolting and stop them from creating a democratic government, I disagree. Or even a new government. I disagree. I think that this is if anything is the perfect thing, unsatisfied citizens are the ones that revolt. Look at the American Revolution. Citizens that were unhappy with what was happening revolted. This is what's happened all over the Middle East. When citizens are in an oppressive regime, they step up and they say no. And so it's time. I mean, I'm not saying it's time for an Iranian revolt, and no one can force an Iranian revolt, but I am saying that sanctions don't stop an Iranian revolt.
I guess Kareem's perspective is that these sanctions were so crippling to the point where people can't even think of starting a revolution. What would you say to that?
Can we clarify for the listeners how long sanctions have been around?
Sanctions have been around since, from the U.S., at least since the 60s, still on Cuba.
For Iran specifically.
Oh, for Iran,
Yes.
Since the revolution, essentially.
I'm sorry,
essentially
can you repeat
since,
that?
It's been a while. I mean, since the Islamic Republic was formed, sanctions were lifted.
when was it,
relatively-
79?
79 was the
Yeah.
revolution, yeah.
So, Kareem, what is your reaction to hearing this report from the LA Times that the U.S. has since lifted some of the sanctions, or the red tape at least, surrounding sanctions
Well,
on medicine?
I actually saw the article this morning. I didn't get a chance to read it fully. I mean, that's obviously a good thing. However, EU recently announced that they'll be tightening up the sanctions. And
The
so
EU,
the EU,
European Union.
right? And EU plays a huge role in the sanctions as well. So we have to take that into consideration. And this is a small portion of the sanctions, of course, and the EU is tightening sanctions as well. So while this is obviously a good thing, if the fact of the matter is it's still much tighter, especially because EU raised the bar or increased the intensity of the sanctions. As for what Jack told me, all right, so I'm going to go through pretty much the points that you made. So why Iran, not Cuba or North Korea? Well, look, I mean, we're only a student group. We don't do so much. It's like saying, why are you fighting for cancer, not heart disease or whatever? And as you mentioned with the article, I said that the EU sanctions have tightened up, so things are still pretty bad. And to go to Ahmadinejad and say, stop abusing your people and so on and so forth. Fact of the matter is, I mean, from personal experience, being Lebanese and being from a country that doesn't necessarily have a lot of power, a very corrupt state, a very weakened state with a very weak economy, though Lebanon's much weaker than Iran. I think even if I don't support my regime or support whatever political party is ruling it, for me, my priority is to prevent any foreign intervention, to have the sort of independence that I have, and trying to find the right term for it. My mind's gone blank. But yeah, so I think for a lot of people in Iran, they aren't a fan of Ahmadinejad at all, and a lot of them felt betrayed after the Green Revolution for sure. But at the same time, if they don't have their sovereignty, if there are no foreign powers intervening, we can't. And in fact, matters if they keep revolting with foreign powers intervening, it's going to be a much weaker position for them, especially because the Middle East is so fragile. There's so many foreign countries intervening in the Middle East, and they want to have a sort of stable place. And if they want change, they want to be mobilized through them alone, through Iranians who live in Iran, who understand what's happening in Iran, who have their own concerns, not concerns of other governments. That's it. Regarding Israel being attacked by its neighbors, the fact of the matter is that Israel's military is superior to any of these countries. While I am against, and while the anti-war coalition is against any sort of violence towards innocent civilians, and while I acknowledge that Hezbollah in Lebanon, my own country, and Hamas in Gaza, did shoot rockets at Israel, and they are causing a lot of problems for Israeli civilians. At the same time, the way that Israel's been, fighting back has been affecting much more civilians there. And so, the fact of the matter is that we're also being attacked by Israel, also feeling the effects of a strong Israeli military, and that's pretty much it. And of course, while we don't support a nuclear weapons program in Iran, we also don't support a nuclear weapons program anywhere. And right now, Israel is the only country in the Middle East that has a nuclear weapons program. And so, the fact of the matter is, it would be a much safer place if nobody had a nuclear weapons program. And this is pretty much the perspective. It's not just exclusive to us; it's exclusive to most activist groups in Iran, or or Iranian groups outside of Iran, from the diaspora, such as Havar and New York, who came to speak about this, taking a principled stance against state repression and sanctions. And Israel, he said that Israel doesn't have any intention of destroying any other country. But we have seen that with many other situations, including Gaza, for example, the siege on Gaza, that this has been putting them in a dire situation. It was said that Gaza is going to be unlivable by 2020. The maritime airspace and border blockades, this is causing a lot of problems to Gazans, and clearly it's not weakening Hamas that much, but destroying the well-being of Gazans. And this is a concern. In 2006, when I was in Lebanon during Israel's invasion, we experienced some terrible things. I was among the privileged who wasn't affected. I didn't have any members of my family hurt, but we were considered privileged to live with 4 to 6 hours of electricity a day for a 6-week period. And this was a huge concern. Iran funding terrorists and problems. Actually, we can look at Iran has a very deterrent. Obviously, I don't support it, right? But Iran's act is deterrent. It's not an offensive. It's a deterrent, and it was pretty much said over here. Actually, by Lieutenant General Ronald Burgess, who was director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he pretty much said this in Congress that Iranian leadership pursues a security strategy intended to deter an attack on its territory. Iran uses terrorism where broadly serve as a strategic deterrent. Iran's military strategy is designed to defend against external threats, particularly from the United States and Israel. Iran can conduct limited offensive operations with strategic ballistic missile program and naval forces. Iran's defense spending is relatively low compared to the rest of the region, and so on and so forth. And finally, unsatisfied citizens starting a revolution. Definitely, without a doubt, but the difference is that when you're starving, when you don't know whether you can afford, health care or whatever for your children, you want stability, because there's always concern after a revolution in the aftermath in this sort of gray area that things will get even worse, and that's a huge concern. And for me, most of Iranian citizens are already unsatisfied. There was a green movement not too long ago, so if the sanctions have that sort of purpose on the side, then I think that's redundant and unnecessary, and I think it's a form of collective punishment if that is an actual legitimate side purpose per se to start like a political movement. I'd call that punishment, because it's not like the Iranian people are enjoying Ahmadinejad for the most part. I think they're quite upset with him, and you can clearly see that. And most Iranian active groups, including Havar, like I said, are against state repression as well. They aren't saying that Ahmadinejad is doing the right thing. They're saying, well, look, he's terrible, but the sanctions are worse because he's getting more power and we're struggling more, and we can't continue doing what we're doing against him because we're having a really tough time.
So returning to that idea of state repression, it's interesting that we're in the U.S., but we're debating a topic that's on the other side of the world. And theoretically, I guess the question is why should we care? Why are we debating this? What's the impact of any of these sides on us as U.S. citizens? We can start with you, Jack.
Absolutely. I'm here because, honestly, if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, they put the only U.S. democratic ally in the region in direct threat. They put Israel into a direct threat, and it's a serious problem there. And that issue is that, and also I've been to Israel. I love Israel. I lived in Israel for a year, and if Israel becomes threatened, the U.S. becomes threatened. And it's been said. I have the quotes from the debate, the foreign policy debate. If you watch the debate, you saw both Mitt Romney and Obama agree. Which really is crazy because it's a debate.
So what are they agreeing on? Why is the U.S. threatened?
Right, they're agreeing because Israel's security is tied to the U.S.'s security, and that's militarily, and that's many other ways. And the fact is that if Israel is threatened, and I'm going to quote them here, if Israel is threatened, if I'm not, I'm going to jump, I may paraphrase because I don't want to read over this whole thing because I read it earlier, but if Israel is threatened, the U.S. is threatened, is the idea. And that is something those are my two homelands. I do not want either of those places to be threatened, and so I will do whatever I can to make sure Iran does not get a nuclear weapon. And that, by the way, is the position of Romney and Obama, which is no option is off the table.
But I guess what I'm asking is why is U.S. so dependent on Israel's security and vice versa?
Well, in the least stable region in the world, arguably, the one place where democracy reigns, the one place where there aren't overthrowings and there aren't uprisings is Israel. So the U.S.'s only ally in the most unstable region in the world is Israel. That's not only a military ally, where they can station troops without being afraid that terrorists will come in and blow it up, and without knowing that Israel teaches the U.S. how to fight in the desert, because that's what the IDF does, the Israeli Defense Force does for the U.S. But it's also an ally that supplies the U.S. with intelligence about terrorist organizations all across the world, and it's an economic ally. Israel is one of the largest tech innovators in the world, and even being in Massachusetts, which is one of the largest tech industries in the United States, Massachusetts itself has a very strong tie to Israel in the tech industry, actually. So we are allies with Israel in many, many, many ways.
I have a question about sanctions, pretty much for you, Jack, but Kareem, feel free to jump in.
Sure.
One of the biggest criticisms against sanctions is that it really only punishes the citizens of Iran, and that it doesn't do anything to the government because the government is oppressive and has money and can work their way around them. So I've heard people say, the U.S. is spinning their wheels in terms of trying to impose sanctions at all. What do you say to that?
It's a great question. Truth be told, sanctions may not affect the government. You know what? I can't say for sure because I'm not in the Iranian government. I can't say, and I've heard that as well. And what I say when people tell me that is this: sanctions make it real. Sanctions say to a government, stop it now. We're not kidding. You might think we were kidding. If we just said, please stop your nuclear arms pursuit, that's one thing. But when you put in sanctions and you show that government that you're serious, is it a show of force? Maybe. I don't think it's a political maneuver to start a revolution. I don't think that's what it is. I was just saying that in response to your revolution point. But is it what it is it's a show of, you need to stop this because we are serious about stopping you from getting a nuclear bomb. And this is the most peaceful thing we can do to stop you. If you continue, we don't know what's going to happen. Those are decisions we will have to make if you continue going after this nuclear weapon. But where sanctions try and show a government, we really need you to stop this right now.
So I think, go ahead, Kareem.
Sorry, I just have a couple questions to answer. I think because you asked the question, I feel like I should answer it just a little bit. All right, so I'm going to start with your question on sanctions first of all, and a bit of response to Jack. All right, so yeah, it's definitely a political force, but to me, sanctions is not peaceful at all. I think it's very violent, and I think it's a form of economic warfare. Because when people are starving to death, when the currency is devaluing such a terrible extent, and when people don't have access to goods and so on and so forth, this is clearly violent because you're pretty much putting people on their knees, and so I don't think it's peaceful at all. It's definitely a form of economic warfare. Also, the question regarding on why you find this really important for Americans to know about. Well, America's had a huge history in the Middle East. It's been involved so much, and there's this terrible notion that a lot of Arabs don't like the U.S. or would have something against the U.S. For me, it's not whether the U.S. It's not because of ideals that the U.S. might carry. I think it's more of the U.S. involvement in the Middle East because a lot of it's just very not so great, to be honest. And so first of all, let's begin. You said that Romney and Obama agreed that U.S.-Israel security are tied together, and many will disagree with me, but I don't think the Democrats and Republicans have that much differing when it comes to foreign policy. Some people say that Democrats are a bit more peaceful, but Bill Clinton had these sanctions on Iraq, and those were incredibly violent. Also regarding the U.S. ally with Israel, definitely. Israel is the strongest ally of the U.S. in the Middle East, without a doubt, and you can see this throughout history. But at the same time, the U.S. has important economic ties with Saudi Arabia, the Persian Gulf, and has a lot of troops stationed. And if you go to Kuwait, you can see that the U.S. has a lot of troops in the north near the Iraqi border, naval forces, and so on and so forth. The U.S. is so involved in the Middle East; it's so intertwined, and I think it's important that we understand what the U.S. is doing in the Middle East because, while the U.S. has a lot of allies, a lot of people don't know that a lot of Jordanians don't like the King of Jordan and they have an issue with him. And the U.S. is considered a huge ally. A lot of people don't know that Joe Biden said that, and he said this on PBS, that Hosni Mubarak is not a dictator but needs to listen to his own people, when all these Egyptians have been revolting against him. And the tear gas canisters and the rubber bullets or whatever was being used, I think the flash grenades were used, these were supplied by the U.S. The perspective that we're getting about our relationship with the Middle East here is very different than back there. And a lot of us, because we're so far geographically, we don't experience the reality. And I think it's important that Americans understand what the U.S. government is doing abroad. It's American tax money. It's representation of Americans in general. And what happens is that people are like, they don't like the U.S. because they like authoritarian regimes or they have an issue with secularism, which is not. If you go to the Middle East, there's so many secularist movements, a lot of people who take a lot from the US, but also have their own sort of thing going on as well. And a lot of people here, when I first moved here, a lot of people asked me questions saying, like, what's the deal with Iran? Why do they hate us so much? And I'm like, look, they have a crazy regime, but a lot of the people don't. They just don't like any violence being put on them. It's just that sort of thing. So it's definitely very important that people get to know what the US is doing abroad, including the sanctions.
So jumping off that point, as someone who studied a lot of IR here at school and foreign policy and security studies specifically, when you look at this whole scenario with Iran and this supposed nuclear weapon and Israel and their security concerns, you have to ask the question, why does Israel feel threatened by this potential weapon that we don't know is happening or not? And the truth is, Israel will always feel as though its security is threatened. It's just in that region, like, pursuing policies that make it a security threat for itself, right? Behaviors such as the settlements and aggressive military occupations and just the use of really violent tactics will always make you a security threat to yourself because you're angering the people and hurting the people around you. So while it's true that Israel has gone to war and has been attacked by its Arab neighbors, at this point, as Kareem mentioned before, they're militarily superior to all of those nations, probably combined. So the reason it's still a security threat, there's still a security threat, is because of some of the policies Israel pursues in supposed self-defense or in preventative measures for its own defense. Now, the second point is, when we look at Iran, we have such a narrow-minded point of view when we approach this nation. Iran, the Persian Empire, has been around for a long time, and our relationship to Iran has been something that has gone through ups and downs over the last few decades. But when we analyze the fact that in 1953 there was a democratic movement in Iran that was stifled by our own CIA, which then led to us installing a brutal Shah, and then because of this brutal Shah, a move towards radical Islam, then we can start to understand the fact that our interventions and our careless interventions in Iran has caused it to be the pariah that it is now. So I guess we're running a little short on time, but my point is that when analyzing any of these things, it's important to keep a very broad perspective to understand the history behind what's happening and the impact that we're seeing now, and also the impact that our actions will have in the future. I tend to agree with a lot of what both of you said, and I don't think the difference is actually that big. We all agree that the people starving in Iran because of sanctions is a bad thing, but I just don't find the sanctions effective at all. And I think if security is the real concern, then we'll pursue policies that lead to more security. And in this case, economic trade, increasing your relations with the nation is the best way to increase security. So I don't think sanctions work at all.
Coming from maybe to dumb down a lot of this. I mean, if you were to speak to the average person, if somebody who's a blank slate, who doesn't know too much about the issues, kind of in the beginning stages of really coming to terms with what's going on, people have questions. Is Iran against nuclear weapons to avert attention to themselves? Is Iran against these weapons to gain approval of other countries? Is Iran against nuclear weapons to go behind people's back and catch up in the nuclear arms race? Or are they genuinely trying to safeguard their borders and not their extreme interests? That's something that a lot of people, very naturally, wonder about and need to know. I'm not sure if you could speak to that.
I can try.
Okay.
I can definitely go for it. All right. First of all, before I start, I want to reiterate that I am not a supporter of Ahmadinejad or the current Iranian regime, but I do think that in a way it's a bit of a defensive maneuver. If you think about it, I mean, Iran is surrounded by places with massive U.S. bases: Afghanistan, Iraq, and those have massive U.S. military deployments. And Turkey, is NATO. Saudi Arabia, which is another powerful country, is a huge ally of the U.S., and they do massive trades, arms and petroleum and whatnot. So Iran feels a bit threatened, and Iran has always felt threatened throughout history. In fact, especially during the Ottoman Empire, for example, the Shiite populations were always looked at as Persian spies. So Iran, I think, is trying to protect its borders in a way, or just protect itself from potential threat. Whether Iran's going to develop a nuclear weapon or not, we don't know at this point. There isn't really enough it hasn't been proven, and I think clearly that the solution is diplomatic means. Sanctions don't work. It's a form of economic warfare. There's the Helsinki Conference, and there are these much better pragmatic solutions which can be done in a much better fashion.
I have a question for you, Kareem, primarily, but I think everybody can agree that sanctions is not a good thing, quote unquote.
Sure.
But just assuming the U.S. decide to completely get rid of sanctions and stop doing that, what's the next step? What would be the method of dealing with Iran, which has been very hostile?
Okay. Well, I'm glad you've asked. So, first of all, I think the U.S. should, and I think all NPT signatory states should play their role in encouraging the non-signatories to sign it, including Israel, India, and Pakistan. Mm-hmm. And then I think that the Helsinki Conference is going to be a huge turning point, because it's a time where Iran and Israel and the Arab states can get together and say, okay, we can make a deal together. And when they make a huge deal together, this can take on many different things. I also think that Iran and Israel should negotiate, and because they're both a bit hostile, they should find a different mediator, not the U.S., but someone who's a bit neutral, like Turkey or Brazil, for example, who are allies, or not necessarily allies, but they're on good terms with both states, and they could have some sort of negotiation. I think that's the solution, and I think the solution is also a change of U.S. policy in the Middle East, and I think a change of the way Israel has some of its policies in the Middle East as well.
Jack, do you want to respond?
I have many, many things to say real quick.
I know we're short on time.
It's okay, I'll make them as quick as possible. These are just all in responses to things that you said last time or things that you said, Tarif. Mm-hmm. Okay, first of all, the EU sanctions and the crippling down of those, yes, unprecedented, but that doesn't show the world's disconcern for the Iranian people. That shows the world's united behind preventing a nuclear Iran. The EU and the UN, and the US, everyone is against Iranian getting a nuclear bomb. And so that's why they all buckled down on Iran with sanctions. So yes, the EU buckling down with sanctions, maybe that's bad for the Iranian people. I don't know any statistics about the death tolls that the sanctions have actually caused in Iran, but I imagine that it is making it very difficult for the Iranian people, and it's a problem, and it's something that needs to be addressed. But the EU buckling down just shows the world how united the world is against a nuclear Iran. As for Israel, I'm not here to talk about Israel. I'm here to talk about American sanctions on Iran. However, since it's been brought up so many times, I will say this. Israel, again, has been attacked by all of its neighbors, every single one, not the least of which is Gaza. Okay, the Gaza territory, if you will, whatever you want to call it, has had state-funded terror where they shoot thousands of rockets into Israel. 15 seconds for children to run from a playground to a bomb shelter. You want to talk about dead babies, and I'm not saying this in a mean way, but talk about 15 seconds for a mother to scoop up 3 kids and run to a bomb shelter.
I don't think you want to bring up death counts of children, because
I'm not trying to bring up death counts of children. I'm trying to bring up the threat that is posed to a country and its children. There's a threat posed by rockets being shot from the north and the south. In Sderot and in the north, in the Golan Heights, there are rockets being shot into Israel that affect regular, everyday civilians. Not just that, a reason why Turkey should not be a mediator in a conversation is because if you remember the flotilla that got a lot of news, and then everyone stopped looking at it because in the news it turned out that videos came out of the people on the flotilla which launched from Turkey attacking the Israeli forces that guarded it to search the flotilla. They guarded it to search it. They said, we just want to look and make sure you're not bringing any weapons into Gaza. That's all we want to do. They got on, they got attacked. And I can send you a link to the video if you like. But that came from Turkey. That is clearly not the place where Israel can negotiate. I'm not saying Turkey is an enemy of Israel or America. I am saying, though, that they have a role in this, and I don't think it's as a mediator. That's just on one thing. You brought up Saudi Arabia. I'm trying to speed through this because I got to get out of here. Not for any of you guys, but I have to deliver eggs. Right. You brought up Saudi Arabia. I'd love to talk about Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia has privately, and ex-politicians of Saudi Arabia have also called for Israel to make sure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. And I can send you quotes.
I don't disagree with you at all. I'm sure they have done that.
No one wants Iran to get a nuclear weapon. That is the point. In addition, give me 1 second. I'm just going to continue. I wrote down a lot. The point, when it comes down to it, about if you want to talk about Israel and the relations to America, that's a completely different debate. But when it comes to sanctions on Iran, the world is united, the United States is united. This isn't a questionable issue. There are many sides to how bad sanctions are, and I, again, I'm not pro-sanctions in any way, but I would say that they are the lesser of going in and doing what some people have called for. There have been many Americans, politicians even, who have called for an attack on Iranian bases that have supposed nuclear weapons. Oh, another thing about that. The no proof that Iran is doing nuclear weapons, the IAEA, the UN's unbiased source for inspection on nuclear arms and nuclear proliferation and nuclear medicine even, and nuclear energy, they've gone in and their reports have been, quote, according to the, let me just get the exact source here, hold on, sorry. Just want to make sure I have it down. All right. According to not only the Bipartisan Policy Center, but according to the IAEA's report, if you read the report, you see, A, suspicious activity in Iran. On Boston.com, they had an article about the fact that there are satellite pictures of Iran cleaning up what could have been nuclear arms, or working towards nuclear arms. North Korea has already said they've given Iran technology to make nuclear weapons. Iran is going after a nuclear bomb.
Which year was that?
Which year was that?
Yeah. Was it incredibly recent?
I'm not sure exactly how recent it was, but I can look it up for you.
Because a few years ago, Hamad al-Baradei, who's the UN chief weapon inspector, said that there is no credible evidence of Iranian nuclear weapons.
Okay, well then it was definitely within the last couple of years, since the sanctions, I believe, started to really buckle down over the last couple of years. And I can send you an article.
But doesn't that imply a correlation between increased sanctions and a faster pursuit of the nuclear weapons?
It might.
Which would be counterproductive.
It would be counterproductive, but I think that it's important to say to a government, we're not just, if you excuse my language, spouting gas, or it's not really bad language, but still. Mm-hmm. We're not just talking. We're serious, and you need to stop this nuclear weapon action. And if Iranians don't stop it, I don't know what's going to happen. But as I said, multiple politicians have called for a red line to be drawn, and once Iran crosses that red line, maybe there will be bombings. I don't know. I have no idea. Would I support any and all means to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon? Yes. Undoubtedly.
Can I ask you a quick question? All right,
yes.
So recently the Brookings Institute, I believe, we found a poll saying that 65% of Israeli civilians aren't interested in a nuclear weapons program in Iran, but they're also against, they're also for adding any nuclear programs in Israel as well. So would you find that being a solution, ending all nuclear weapons in the entire Middle East, having a nuclear weapons-free zone?
I wouldn't say it's a bad solution. I wouldn't say it's the perfect solution to me, personally, because Israel's security as a deterrent, and also that's another thing we talked about, Iran having nukes as a deterrent. Sorry, I will get to that. But talked about Iran having deterrence, these are just coming back to me. And yes, Iran could have deterrence as a nuclear weapon, but then when they give 60,000 rockets to Hezbollah, that's a pretty big deterrent for anyone to go in and stop them from giving 60,000 rockets to a known terrorist organization. Now, talking about the no nukes in the Middle East, 65% of Israelis, okay, well, I haven't seen those numbers. I would love for you to send me that poll, first of all. But if that's the case, why doesn't Iran officially stop going after nuclear weapons until December in Helsinki? Why doesn't Iran abandon their nuclear sites until December? Why don't they do that? Because Israel's not making new nuclear weapons right now, if they have nuclear weapons at all, which again, I'm not saying they do. But the point is that if Iran was serious about this and serious about no nukes in the Middle East, they would stop their nukes right now, go to the conference and have a conversation. Sit down at the table, talk about it. But don't just say, you should throw away your nukes while we're working on ours.
All right. Well, if you want to ask that sort of question, I can ask a similar question. If Israel's really interested in not having any nuclear threat, why doesn't it sign the NPT? If it's so confident about its security, if it's so interested in security, it should sign the NPT.
There's a map right there. There's a map right there. Look at all the countries that have attacked Israel.
Right.
Or funded attacks on Israel.
Look, if you find most of Israel's neighbors incredibly huge threat in comparison to Israel's military, then there's a huge.
I'm not talking about in comparison to Israel's military, but I'm talking about in the history. We're talking about history. Let's talk about 1948 when Israel was founded. The fact that the government in Gaza, governments all over the Middle East, refuse to recognize the state of Israel and its right to exist. That is an issue. And when you recognize a place's right to exist, that's like me sitting here and saying, well, I'm not going to argue with you because you don't actually sit in that chair. That's BS.
But times have changed, to be honest. I mean, right now, Israel, for example... hold on. Let me explain. All right,
Please.
so Israel, for example, right now they have a siege on Gaza back then. Right now, Israel controls Gaza's borders, its airspace, its waters. Israel has a much stronger military presence than before. It has the Golan Heights. It has a lot of the West Bank, it has all these settlements going on, so therefore increased military presence beyond the Green Line. It has the big security fence, or wall as I call it. So things are much different, and I think the situation of the Palestinians, a lot of the Lebanese in the south, with the economic crisis, with recent military things are a lot worse. So I think it's different. And even back then, Israel did easily defeat all its attackers, so I think it's different.
Yeah.
Easily.
So, it's almost 4, and we have to relinquish the room. I think the conversation here was excellent. Thank you both for coming along and sharing your point of views. And I think what we'd request, just for anyone who's listening, is if you guys, the links and the statistics you brought up, if you could send them to Amanda, and we'll put them up along with the podcast, and people can sort of click on it. And yeah, we really appreciate it. We think this is important.
Thank you
It's
very much.
important.
Yeah, we
I think it's very
absolutely love
important.
having all of you on. Jack, Kareem, Jay, thank you so much.
Thanks for
We
having us.
might end up having to have another show on this because I feel like we
still
barely
alive.
scratched the surface. But thank you so much.
Thank you
This is
for
the
having us.
Common
Thank
Thread,
you
the
very
official
much for having us.
podcast of the Howard Thurman Center. I'm Amanda Dowd.
This is Tarif.
And I'm Greg.
Thank you so much. We'll see you guys next time.
Thanks.